Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Walaikum assalam.
All right. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yes, you are now.
Thank you so much for telling me. Okay. So this is Aisha Sajjad from Fire Safety Management Institute. And we are presenting our training session for today on unit number 3 of OTHM Level 7 Diploma in Environmental and Sustainability Management. The title of unit number 3 is unit number 6 is Advanced Principles of Net Zero. We have a total of 9 units, out of which 4 are mandatory and 5 units are optional units. The participants or the learners have to choose any 2 out of these optional units. And out of these optional units, today we are talking about the second one, which is Advanced Principles of Net Zero. In order to understand the title of this unit better, we will break this down into 2 pieces or 2 parts. So by advanced principles, we mean that as the world is progressing, as the environmental policies and procedures are changing, as the world is becoming more and more aware of the problems that we have related to the climate and environment, we are having better, more advanced, and more technically approved principles of what? The concept of net zero. What is net zero? This is something we will be talking about frequently throughout today's presentation so that anybody who's not aware of this concept will better get to know it. So for this presentation on unit number 6, we have a few aims and objectives that we have in our mind. So first of all, we will be talking about how the COP21 gave a net zero agenda. What is net zero agenda? How the governments have been asked to have certain objectives and policies on this net zero agenda and to have specific aims on it. How is this concept of net zero different from a very, very close concept known as carbon neutrality? Why is it so urgent? Why is this concept of net zero so important? Why do we have to involve into it? Why do we have to talk about it? And there's this concept of GHG accounting or greenhouse gas accounting, which is about measuring and calculations. This is also related to the phenomena of net zero. It will also be discussed. After this, Our aim is to talk about science-based targets. I will not go into the detail of any of these headings now because we will be talking about these later. For your convenience, for the convenience of the learners, I have divided today's unit into 5 sections. The first section will talk about net zero. The second section will talk about what is GHG accounting. The third about science-based targets. The fourth about what is environmental communication. And the fifth about what is climate change adaptation or resilience. First of all, let's get started with the first section, which is the most important section, which can lay the foundation of this concept known as net zero. Is any one of the participants already aware of this term or has ever heard about it? Would anybody like to come up and tell me what net zero is? All right, I'll talk about it. By net zero, let's just expand this term a little. Net zero means net zero carbon dioxide emissions or net zero greenhouse gas emissions. This might make it a little clearer to you. This concept revolves around this one important fact that we want to have a net zero level of carbon emissions. We want to have a net zero level of greenhouse gases, and we want to have a net zero level of all of these emissions. This here in the form of a smart chart is a definition of the term for you. First of all, we see that carbon emissions need to be reduced. This is what's related to the net zero. We need to reduce the carbon emissions. We need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. We need to make sure through our activities and mechanisms that the amount of carbon emissions or the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we produce are absorbed or stored by nature. So that if we are producing greenhouse gas emissions from somewhere, they are being absorbed, they are being removed from somewhere else, so that this entire system can be balanced. If the gases are produced, they are being removed at the same time. This is what's known as the balancing of the greenhouse gas emissions. It's very important that we keep this level 1.5 degrees less as compared to the level that we have pre-industrial. We all know about what industrial innovation or industrial development was. It happened around 1800. Before that era, the amount of greenhouse gases that were produced by industries, that were produced by transportation, that were produced by businesses and so on were very less as compared to the levels that we have today. After industrialization happened, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions increased very fast. The Paris Agreement, also known as the COP21, that happened in 2021, that took place in 2015, talked about this concept of net zero so much and focused on it, and can also be called as the basic foundation of net zero concept. The level that we have nowadays as compared to the pre-industrial levels is 1.1 degrees. We need to make sure that the emissions produced are removed, reduced, eliminated at the same time from somewhere. This can also be called as the source is equal to sink phenomena. We produce carbon emissions from a source. They are being taken up by a sink. by the word sink, you can bring this concept of the sinks that we have in our kitchens, the sinks that we have at a lot of places in our toilets and stuff, where the water goes inside. The sinks take in something. The sinks are allowed to take up something. They remove something. They remove the water that we pour on them. They remove whatever materials we are pouring on them. So this is what this terminology of sink means. So we say that as we have so many sources from where greenhouse gas emissions are being produced, we have many industries, our daily lives, the constructions that we have, the infrastructure that we have, the buildings that we live in, the transportation that we use, the kind of a construction industry that we have, the procedures that we use for that, the manufacturing industry that we have, the businesses that we have. Every single activity around our lives is producing greenhouse gas emissions in some way. Some are producing more, the others are producing less. So it's important that, keeping in mind the amount of sources that are leading to greenhouse gas emissions, we also need to produce and manage sinks that are allowed to eliminate these greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere, so that the temperature of the earth can be maintained, it can be reduced as compared to the levels that we have today. You also want to make sure that a level has been set by the Paris Agreement or the COP21 that happened in 2015, that the level of greenhouse gas emissions that are expected in 2030 need to be 45% as less as compared to the level that we have in 2010. Another thing that can be said is that the concept of net zero basically ends or basically fulfills itself expectedly around the year 2050. That says that the amount of emissions that we have of greenhouse gases or carbon emissions need to go to net zero. They need to go to zero. They need to completely vanish by the year 2050. But why do we have to do it? Why do we have to indulge in net zero? Why do we have to reduce and remove and eliminate these greenhouse gas emissions? Because all of this is leading to the phenomena of global warming. All of this is leading to the phenomena of climate change. We know that as the temperatures increase, the phenomena of greenhouse gas emissions, the phenomena of greenhouse gas is happening, which is leading to the increase in temperature of the world, which is leading to more warming, which in return is leading to the phenomena of climate change. Therefore, when somebody talks about net zero, it automatically means that we want to talk about the phenomena of global warming or climate change, and we want to protect our planet, and we want to make our planet more habitable. We want to make our planet more sustainable for the future generations to come. Since the Paris Agreement 2015 or the COP21, there have been certain goals. I just talked about the goal of 2030. I talked about the goal of 2050. Both of these are highly important and need to be kept in mind by the learners. But this is where it all started. It started in Paris in 2015, when many countries of the world came together. Many NGOs, many organizations, many partners, many volunteers came together as the indulging parties of COP21, and they said that we need to work towards the net zero goal. So we ultimately want to go to 2050 and make sure that the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we have by 2050 are completely vanished or completely decreased by 2050. When in 2015 the goal was set, the people and the countries started working on this, and they provided certain goals and pledges on how they will be indulging in net zero. By the year 2020 till the year 2021, the amount of activities, the amount of initiatives that were taken by governments to work towards the net zero agenda increased. This meant, as shown in the picture, as shown in this small picture, that the activities, a lot of them were banned. A lot of those activities were asked to be removed. Governments started to work towards it, and many countries are more modern when it comes to the net zero agenda. By the year 2030, which is not far from now, we are expecting that the amount of greenhouse gas emissions will be 45% less as compared to the levels that we have back in 2010. And let's hope the picture is this bright that by 2050, the level is entirely zero, and we can say that we will be using certain renewable resources of energy. The world is all green and the planet is being protected. I hope this happens. Talking about why is net zero important, I just talked about it in the previous slide also, that net zero is important, net zero is urgent, net zero is the need of the hour. Why? Because this is connected, this is automatically related to the phenomena of climate change and global warming, and related to the protection of the planet. If we want to protect our planet, if we want to promote sustainable development, if we want to prevent a very bad fate, if we want to prevent some really horrific fate for our planet, we need to work towards this goal of net zero. For this purpose, as you can see in this picture, that the amount of activities or industrial processes or any other process for that matter, from any sector that is releasing greenhouse gases need to be equalized by certain procedures, by certain methodologies, by certain steps that we take off those greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. They absorb those greenhouse gases. We all know that plants or trees, they are able to capture greenhouse gas emissions. They are able to capture the greenhouse gases that they find in the atmosphere through the phenomena of photosynthesis. They capture it and they keep it in themselves. However, if these plants are removed, if we cause deforestation, if we do not plant these trees, this entire process cannot take place. We cannot capture greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot capture these gases, and thus this balance can be really disturbed. Therefore, for net zero, it is important that the amount of gases that we produce are equalized by the amount of gases that are absorbed or stored or removed through the atmospheric natural processes. As the process of the net zero is happening, a lot of global goals have been set by countries at national as well as international levels. For this, first of all, this word or this temperature of 1.5 degrees is very important. It is said that we need to limit, we need to stop, we do not need to go beyond this boundary of 1.5 degree rise of temperature as compared to the temperature that we had post pre-industrialization. Before the industrialization happened, the level of temperature that we had was different, it was low. So we need to make sure that even all the activities are happening in the world today, we do not let the temperature increase, we do not let the global temperature increase go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. If this is something we succeed in, the phenomena of net zero can be achieved. Secondly, a global goal which is very important for the net zero is that countries need to have commitments, countries need to have pledges, countries need to have some real and solid decarbonization plans. However, those plans need to be reviewed, those plans need to be checked every 5 years so that we can see if the countries or the parties are going in the right direction or not, and how transparent the process is. Number 3, we talk about climate financing. As the term depicts itself, that we are talking about how we can provide monetary help, financial help, economic help to smaller countries or developing countries that are transitioning towards decarbonization, that are transitioning towards net zero, so that they can succeed in their plans. So we can say that we first of all want to limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees. We want to keep reviewing our goals. We want certain parties, we want certain environmental bodies to keep reviewing the goals and pledges that countries have. And we also want to make sure that countries that are small, countries that are not very economically strong, are being provided climate financing. It is also very important that when we talk about global goals related to net zero, we need to take some really bold, some really credible, some really authentic decisions, and some really authentic actions. For example, you can go through this picture and keep seeing every single action that is being told here, which can lead to net zero. So we can say that we need to provide climate financing, as it's shown here. We see some dollars, we see money. So it depicts that we need to have climate financing. The windmill here shows that we need to have more renewable sources of energy, such as the windmills, such as solar panels. We need to protect our sea creatures. We need to protect our sea biodiversity. And we also need to protect the marine ecosystems. We need to move towards recycling and other procedures that can protect our planet. We need to plant more trees. We need to have reforestation procedures every single year and all throughout the year. We need to limit certain mechanisms, certain activities that have been going on since decades, but are entirely wrong because these are damaging our environment. We need to transition towards more electric cars, more sustainable transportation systems. We need to use public transportation. We need to commute together. We can use public transportation system for this. We need to plant more trees. We need to protect the biodiversity, the flora and the fauna. And we also need to have greener homes and greener our infrastructure. And again, protecting our flora and fauna. So these are some of a lot of steps that we need to take, a lot of bold actions that the countries and parties will have to take in order to reach net zero. Moving on to the concept of carbon neutrality. Whenever somebody mentions the term net zero, it is very likely that the concept of carbon neutral also comes with it. But what is the difference? As we can see, the carbon neutral means that we need to go neutral. We need to reduce the amount of carbon that is being produced today. Aren't these the same concepts? These are not. They're very close to each other, yes, but these are not the same. By net zero, we all know that we need to reduce, remove, and eliminate the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. But by carbon neutral, we mean that if we do not have the ability to remove these emissions entirely, we can have certain offsets. We can have certain procedures that can completely balance this procedure out. Again, carbon neutrality, this blue bar here shows the kind of emissions produced, and the light blue bar shows that we are having other procedures that are leading to mitigation, that are causing the mitigation of this process and are in fact leading towards the same phenomena of net zero. But we said that we have set many goals. The countries came together in the Paris Agreement and set many goals and had some really, really enthusiastic ideas to give. But are we heading towards that or not? What is the position that we are standing at today? So we say that in our movement towards zero, in our race towards net zero, a lot of countries are coming together. They are making a coalition, which can be called as world's largest coalition, in which actors, parties, organizations, which are not definitely countries, which are other than the countries, which are part of countries, of course, but these are not countries, are coming together so that the global emissions, as compared to the 2010 level, can be halved, can be reduced by 45% by 2030. So we are being shown a positive picture here that a lot of countries and a lot of non-state actors are coming together, forming coalitions so that the amount of emissions can be reduced by 2030. So how many countries are working towards this goal at the moment? About 140 countries, 9,000 companies, many cities, as much as 1,000 cities, over 1,000 educational institutes, and over 600 financial institutes are moving towards this phenomena of net zero, and they are making sure that 88% of emissions that are being produced presently can be reduced. When we talk about different kinds of international parties, just like we said in the last slide, that many parties and bodies and countries and non-state actors and NGOs are coming together, making coalitions, working towards net zero. There are certain international initiatives that are specifically highlighted, that are specifically very important, and it is very essential that we mention these here. So there is this coalition known as GFANZ. It is basically Glasgow Coalition that talks about how countries are having net zero pledges. Are those countries actually working towards that? Are those countries actually working towards that goal or not? And then we have the UNFCCC campaign, which is known as the Race to Zero campaign, which has been appointed by UNFCCC, United Nations Fund for Climate Change. And then we have the COP. Of course, we talked about Conference of Parties and COP21 or the Paris Agreement. COP is basically that kind of an initiative that happens every single year. It happens annually. Countries and parties come together for this COP. And it is also that it might happen after every 1 year. But now that we're expecting to have COP29, but the COP that happened in 2015 was known as COP21. I keep repeating this so that you can memorize that the COP21 or the Paris Agreement is very important, because that is when this goal of net zero was set for 2050. Before we move on to the section number 2, I want you guys to watch a small video on what is net zero so that you guys can become more clear on what is net zero.
The UK government has committed to reach net zero by 2050. But what does net zero actually mean? Since the mid-20th century, global emissions of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide have been rising. These gases trap heat from the sun, which warms the planet. In the UK, we know we need to reduce our emissions to zero to help avoid the worst effects of climate change. We can cut down on our impact a lot, but we can't yet get rid of all the emissions from things we need, like food and industry. So, to compensate, we also need to actively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Net zero means striking a balance between what we emit and what we remove. It sounds simple, but capturing and storing carbon is not easy, and most of the new technology is currently very expensive or unproven. That's why our emissions need to come down much faster than the current rate. The lower they are, the easier it will be to cancel them out. Carbon capture is certainly not an excuse to carry on burning fossil fuels. Getting to net zero will involve the whole of society, demanding a sustainability effort on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. For the government and businesses, it means eliminating fossil fuels, reducing energy demand, and investing in new technologies and the power of nature. For the public, it means changes to our homes, what we consume, and how we travel. It may sound daunting, but it could actually result in a happier and more healthy society. But some scientists do have concerns about net zero. In the UK, we do not include finance, aviation, or foreign imports in our emissions calculations. These sectors are not counted in the future. Some experts worry we will simply outsource our carbon footprint overseas. Net zero is a necessary and feasible target. If done correctly, it's the radical and decisive action we need to limit warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and protect our planet for future generations. What is net zero? We release 55 gigatons of greenhouse gases into the air every year. To stop global warming, we have to get our greenhouse gas emissions down to zero. But for every country to immediately shut down all greenhouse gas releasing activities would be an enormous challenge, especially since some countries have built up an economic head start with no restrictions. So instead, we can use an approach called net zero. Net zero means that for every molecule of greenhouse gas we put into the air, we also take one out, making our net emissions zero. Net zero requires us to make big changes today, use less more efficiently, and even bigger technological changes for the future, like replacing all greenhouse gas emitting activities with clean ones. We'll also have to capture greenhouse gases from the air and store them permanently. And yet, net zero is our best chance for a sustainable future. What
Okay, so we are back from the video. It says net zero is our chance for sustainability. But definitely, it was in the video that it is not going to be easy because a lot of countries are so indulged in economic processes and fossil fuel consumption that the road to net zero might be very difficult. But we can also say that this is our only hope for protecting our planet and for promoting sustainability for the coming generations. After the video, we are moving to the section 2. In section 1, we talked about what is net zero. We just introduced it a little. We also talked about the concept of carbon neutrality and why is net zero so important. Now we're moving towards the second section, greenhouse gas accounting. It is evident that when you say you want to remove greenhouse gases, you will have to see the amount of greenhouse gases that you have. And how do you see it? You will have to calculate it. You will have to move towards its accounting. You will have to see the levels that we have. The levels, different companies, different businesses, different countries, different regions, and the levels that we globally have. For this purpose, the concept of greenhouse gas accounting is used. As you can see in the slide, first of all, that different entities, businesses, industries, and activities, or to say this in short, every single thing and every person and every single party around our lives is producing greenhouse gases. Now, it is inevitable that we measure and we do the accounting of those greenhouse gases. This entire process is known as greenhouse gas accounting. Would anybody volunteer to come up and give an example of a few greenhouse gases?
Carbon dioxide, madam.
Exactly. Carbon dioxide has to be the most famous greenhouse gas. Another one. Would you like to mention another one?
Methane.
Exactly. Very good. Now, somebody else would also like to contribute. Yes, Mr. Sayed Mir, are you there? So we're saying that we have many gases in our lives that have been produced by different activities, such as carbon dioxide, such as methane gas. Can you think of any other gas that is also leading to greenhouse gas emissions? Okay, someone else, please.
Madam,
Yes.
carbon monoxide.
No, carbon monoxide, not really. But don't you think some gases related to nitrogen are also included in this list?
We have nitrous oxide.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ms. Aisha.
We have
Nitrous oxide.
others
Yes.
as well, like hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, etc.
Exactly. Thank you, Ms. Yusra. Thank you, Ms. Aisha. Okay, so we can say in short that we have carbon-based gases, we have methane, we have nitrogen-based gases, we have fluoride-based gases, and so on. So we have a plenty of greenhouse gases that are leading to the phenomena of greenhouse gas. And thus, we need to calculate or measure the level of those gases, which is known as the phenomena of greenhouse gas accounting. Okay, so as you see the logo of Nestle company and Coca-Cola company here, do you think why I've mentioned and put these logos here? Any guesses?
Because they are contributing much in greenhouse gases.
Very close. Someone else, please. Yes, Mr. Asif Kumar, are you there? Would you like to contribute?
Yes, I'm here. In my understanding, I believe they're using carbonated water. So somewhere they're using these gases in their industries. So there could be a chance
Yes.
of emission. It's my first class, I believe.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. All right. So we're saying that companies like Coca-Cola and Nestle are very famous when it comes to greenhouse gas accounting. It is a simply very separate story that the amount of greenhouse gas emission they are producing are massive, but they are also highlighting themselves. They're also putting themselves out there for the media and telling the media that we are also accounting and measuring and calculating our greenhouse gases through some really credible processes, through some really credible mechanisms. So this is why I've mentioned Nestle and Coca-Cola here. So this is also why, so that you can search for any company, some company that is famous for this and can be highlighted in this regard. Talking about greenhouse gas emissions, we can say that they are produced from a lot of sectors, every single sector of our lives. The energy sector is the one producing the highest amount of GHGs. Then we have the construction industry. Then we have the transportation. We also have the agriculture industry as well as the manufacturing industry. The highest level of GHGs are produced by the energy sector, and then secondly by the manufacturing industry, leading to the production of products and services. When it comes to greenhouse gas accounting, there is a framework, there is a protocol, there is a specific procedure that is there. So if your company, if your specific organization, if your party, if your region, if your country wants to calculate, measure, or account its greenhouse gases, or wants to see the amount of GHGs that you yourself are producing, so you will have to follow this protocol in order to be more consistent, in order to be more specific to the procedure. So we say that the GHG accounting protocol has said that you will have to be very relevant to how the specific documentation has been provided. It is very important that your GHG accounting is also very consistent. It should not be stopping anywhere. There shouldn't be any breakages or hurdles anywhere. This is an ongoing process and needs to go on. It also needs to go on in the most transparent of manners. You need to be as honest as possible when it comes to your greenhouse gases. It is also very, very humble of you that you have stood up. You have decided to measure your greenhouse gases. You have decided to record the levels that you have. And then it is important also that you are also very transparent and very true to this procedure. Your calculations, the kind of accounting procedures, the kind of documentation that you're doing needs to be very, very accurate and in light of the protocol. The procedure says that your GHG accounting also needs to be very complete and brief in itself. Why, according to GHG protocol, is GHG accounting important? It says that in order to satisfy your stakeholders, you need to have more accounting. It says that, for example, there's a company, it has certain stakeholders attached to it, and a lot of stakeholders are becoming environmental advocates. They want you to now work for the environment finally. They want you to talk about your greenhouse gas emissions. They want you to go more green in your manufacturing processes. Therefore, in order to come up to the stakeholder expectations, we need to have such accounting. And then, just like I mentioned, Nestle and Coca-Cola, we can say that companies that talk about greenhouse gases, that record their greenhouse gas levels, that indulge in greenhouse gas accounting actively, are more likely to have a better reputation. They are more likely to be famous among the public, in simple words. Then we can also say that companies that indulge in GHG accounting are more likely to reduce the kind of risks that they have, and they are very likely to enhance the opportunities that might be coming their way. So they're acting very smart. When we talk about UNFCCC and when we talk about the net zero race, the campaign that UNFCCC started, and then about the COP initiative, we can say that countries that come up to these initiatives or these compliances are more likely to come up more successful in terms of their legal compliances. And then they can reduce the cost of their procedures, and they can also improve the kind of operational procedures they have by going sustainable. The financing can be getting more secure, just like we said that the cost of procedures can be reduced. It might come as a misconception. A lot of people might say that if I have to go sustainable, if I want to go greener, if I want to move towards more eco-friendly procedures for my company, for my business, for my industry, I might have to add a lot of cost. I might have to put in a lot of money. However, this is a misconception and a true statement at the same time. There are certain sectors where you will have to put in a lot of money, but obviously the kind of advantage that you will be getting in terms of better reputation, better business reputation, better risk reduction, better opportunities is something that cannot be equalized. Therefore, your financing can become more secure. Your economic structure will become stronger by moving towards accounting of greenhouse gases. This greenhouse gas accounting is something that goes through a very specific procedure, a very simple step-by-step mechanism. So if, for example, there's a company ABC that wants to get up and wants to measure its greenhouse gases, first of all, it will have to look around. It will have to see the kind of a company it is, the kind of a scope it has, the kind of goals and objectives it has. It will have to see the kind of an approach it wants to have for the future. It will have to define its scope and then move towards the second most important step, which is it will have to collect data. Obviously, we want to talk about accounting. Accounting is not complete without collecting data. This is not as simple as it seems. This is a very lengthy procedure because this is something upon which your GHG accounting will be depending. And after this, the GHG accounting will be wholly completing. But this is not where we start. Once we're done recording our GHGs, we are aware of the levels that we have. We are aware of the damage that our industry is doing to the environment. It is also important that we get up and according to GHG protocol, we report and communicate and disseminate those findings to the public, to the stakeholders, to the involved parties, to the local governments, and to the global programs as well. So this is where the process ends. But this is not a process that ends. It is a process that keeps going. You have to keep going in circles and keep starting with moving towards your scope definition. You need to collect data. You need to report it to the people and so on. But all of this from start till end is how your carbon footprint will be determined. Okay, now what is carbon footprint? We've talked about this in a lot of trainings before, and it is also like a buzzword these days. What is carbon footprint? Anybody? Yes, guys, are you guys aware of this term carbon footprint?
It's the total amount of greenhouse gases, like, for example, carbon dioxide gas or methane, that are generated by our actions. Whatever we do on daily basis or on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, how much of carbon we are creating by our activities.
Perfect. So can we also call this our ecological footprint?
I don't think so, because carbon footprint would not be, maybe is not entirely equal to the ecological footprint, right? In my
Alright.
opinion, no.
Okay. Thank you, Aisha. All right. So as much as I know about carbon footprint and ecological footprint, I would think that an ecological footprint considers a lot of other activities as well. It wouldn't just talk about our GHG emissions. It wouldn't just talk about the kind of emissions that our company has. It would also talk about other processes. For example, it would also talk about the kind of waste production and plastic and stuff. So this, when the word carbon comes, this will automatically, just like Ms. Aisha said, that it would automatically refer to the term of greenhouse gas emissions. All right. Okay. So just like we said that we are doing an accounting. Okay. That has to be the first step that we had. We were doing greenhouse gas accounting. Now, the second step in simple words is to keep and maintain a record. And when we say a record, when businesses keep a record of their business, the kind of clients that they have, the kind of orders that they're getting, the amount of orders that they're getting, the amount of payments that they are receiving, the amount of payment that they have to pay to the manufacturers, and so on. This is just a glimpse into it. Businesses keep a proper inventory. Businesses keep a proper record keeping so that nothing goes wrong, so that it can be said that every single thing is in record and it is being kept very carefully. So similarly, when it comes to greenhouse gases, we also have a greenhouse gas inventory, which is going to tell us about how every single activity is leading to this much of gases, this much of greenhouse gas emissions, and this much. Okay. So for example, this is an example I have to quote. So there is Pierce County, which is basically a town. Okay. So Pierce County calculated its greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. It said and it reported and it communicated to the media and to the related parties that our town has a total of 10.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. Okay, this is huge. Okay, and this is just an idea into how much emissions we are producing. Every single one of us is producing. So it said that our county is producing 4% emissions when it comes to its wastewater and waste. It is also producing small amount of GHGs from its refrigerants, such as CFCs, HCFCs, and HFCs. And it is also producing GHGs through its land use processes, agriculture, deforestation, and so on. And then it is also producing greenhouse gases through its transportation, because obviously this is a town. People are moving from one area to another on a daily basis, 24/7, we can say. There are cars, there are buses, there are motorbikes, and then we have public transportation, we have trains, and then we also have planes. Okay, so all of those transportations are leading to 31% of greenhouse gas emissions in this county. And then excessive amount of greenhouse gases is being produced by the built environment. So this not only includes the buildings that are there in this county, it also includes the construction procedures that are leading to the building construction. The construction industry also includes demolition processes. This is where the entire process is. So this also includes the kind of transportation the construction industry is using, and so on. So this is just an example of how countries or towns or cities or organizations can calculate their greenhouse gases. They can perform greenhouse gas accounting, and then they can keep a record or inventory of it. So this was to tell you the definition of greenhouse gas inventory. This means that we need to see the sources from where our emissions are coming. We need to categorize them. We need to divide them. And then we need to keep a record of which sector or which category is producing how much of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. Another example, as a lot of people, a lot of us are obsessed with the Apple company. Okay, I hope none of you is one of those. Okay, so yes, a lot of companies, a lot of people are obsessed with Apple company. Therefore, I mentioned Apple's example here, that Apple, it Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for rejoining, everybody. There was an unexpected problem with the internet, I think because of the unpredictable situation that we have in Pakistan nowadays. Okay, so I was, Mr. Mir, can you please tell me which slide was I at? Do you remember? All right, so I think I'll start once again with Apple Incorporation's GHG inventory. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I was saying that greenhouse gas inventory is something kind of a record that we need to keep. It's kind of a record keeping, which is very important in order to see the kind of carbon dioxide and other emissions that we have, and to see what is the level of greenhouse gas emissions that we have from every single sector, every single activity related to our company. So talking about Apple company, the kind of level of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of metric ton carbon dioxide equivalent that it had in 2012 was 30.9. It increased a little in 2013. It increased very small amount in 2014, and it escalated a lot in 2015. However, after which, because of environmental advocacy decisions and a lot of decisions that Apple took when it comes to its eco-friendly practices and environmental friendly practices, it started decreasing the amount of emissions that it had, and it also decreased. It decreased its emissions to 16.1, but it also started having certain offsets. Offsets are like the procedures that are used to reduce, eliminate, or remove greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere at the same time. So while you are producing greenhouse gases, you're also removing them at the same time. So in 2023, Apple had a record level of 16.1 metric ton of carbon dioxide emissions in 2023, also had a very good level of carbon offsets. So it's important that we keep our carbon dioxide emissions to reduce until the year 2050 and so on, so that we can reach net zero. And also we have to see that we need to keep improving our carbon offsets, as a result of which ultimately all of us will reaching a level of net zero by the year 2050, hopefully. When we talk about carbon dioxide greenhouse gas calculations, countries countries and organizations and businesses and industries use different kinds of calculations. Most of the times these calculations are not manual, because big companies do not have the time and effort to set up and talk about these calculations and do them manually. They use certain softwares, they use certain AI based procedures, they use Internet of Things in order to manage and handle their big data, because they always have a large amount of data to handle. Therefore, in order to handle the greenhouse gas emissions data, they will have to perform these calculations in which the activities are multiplied with the emission factors, and then the emissions as a result that you've gotten are multiplied to the global warming potential. These emission factors are like specific indicators or specific factors that are available online and are specific or different from for every single activity. So once you perform these calculations, you can record and calculate your greenhouse gas calculations, which can be a part of the greenhouse gas accounting. And then you will have to move towards greenhouse gas record keeping or greenhouse gas inventory. Now, what are carbon accounting boundaries? When we talk about carbon accounting boundaries, we say that organizations are working in different kinds of activities. They have many departments, they have many child companies, they have many companies that they also have provided license to, a lot of companies that they are working with, a lot of companies that they have provided permission to work with them. For example, if we talk about PepsiCo company, it might also have a lot of related companies that are not called PepsiCo, but are obviously related companies. For example, take an example of Teen Cola, which is working under Pepsi Cola, but it obviously has a different brand names. So we say that when one company has many other companies that are working in coordination with it. It is having many different kinds of processes and activities, and all of these activities of the company and of its child companies are leading to many different kinds of emissions. There are direct as well as indirect. There are scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. But when we talk about different operations that every one of these is causing, that will come under the process or the concept of operational boundary. Moving on to the section number 3 that talks about science-based targets. The section number 1 talked about what is net zero. The section number 2 talked about if we want to achieve net zero, we will have to do carbon dioxide gases or greenhouse gas accounting. So we discussed the GHG accounting in section number 3 to section number 2. And in section number 3, we are talking about the science-based targets. Now, what are science-based targets? So we say the net zero is a target, decarbonization is a target, moving towards a better economy, moving towards a better environment is a target, sustainable development is a target itself. Every single thing is a target. So when we say there are targets that is backed very properly and very credibly by science is called a science-based target. So there's one company, there is a one coalition that is known as the science-based targets. This is the name of this company, which is working as an environmental charity that works for the benefit of the planet. Therefore, it is known as a charity. And it works with a lot of other companies and it partners with them. Companies such as WWF, UN Global Compact, World Resource Institute, We Mean Business Coalition, all different kinds of organizations that are working with science-based targets to do what? It is providing very customized standards of net zero to different companies. Okay, so for example, there is a company that is working in the sector of textile. It comes up to this institute known as science-based targets, and it wants it to design a very specific standard for this textile company. I am the owner of that textile company. I go to the science-based targets and I tell them that please provide a plan to me which is very customized, which is according to my needs, which is according to my processes, which is according to my value chain, and please provide a proper setup and standard for it so that I am allowed to understand how my net zero agenda, my net zero pledge can be achieved, how I can decrease my greenhouse gas emissions, how I can set different targets for myself and then move for those targets in a credible manner. So this company works for this purpose. This company provides a proper procedure and a step-by-step procedure to companies if they want to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions. Companies, first of all, have to see a base year from where they start. For example, my textile company went to this Science-Based Targets Institute in 2015, and this is where I want to start working on. Okay, now they will give me a proper method of how to calculate my emissions. I will have to set a specific target for myself. These targets can be near term and long term. For example, a near term target for my textile company will be a target that I set for myself for the year 2030, and a target that I set for myself for 2050 will be known as the long term science based target. Okay, and then my target here again would be the year 2050. I will be calculating my targets. I will be calculating my greenhouse gases. I will be putting certain standards for myself. And this is how my decarbonization plan will work till the year 2050, which is basically the year set by the Paris Agreement when we need to achieve net zero. But according to this chart, we can see that this textile company will not be able to reach net zero by 2050. This line shows 0. Okay, this is a starting point. So my company will not be able to reach net zero by 2050. However, the chances are that if I keep tracking this chart, I will be able to reach net zero by the year maybe 2080 or so on. Okay, so this is how companies that are completely clueless of how they will be doing or playing their part in the net zero pledge will go to an institute called the Science-Based Target. It will provide a customized plan and standard for it that will work according to the specific conditions of the company so that they can achieve net zero. According to the science-based targets, it has been said that we have to start so that we move towards this 1.5 degree, less than 1.5 degree level of warming of our temperatures as compared to the pre-industrial levels. So a lot of countries, a lot of companies are working with science-based targets. We have true examples from our present world that about 148 companies are working with science-based targets, and they want to reduce their emissions well below 2000 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius temperature. And then there are companies that want to decrease their temperature or keep it well below 1.5 degrees. And then there are companies that want to keep it below 2000 degrees, well below 2 degrees Celsius. Sorry. Okay, so when we talk about this decarbonization, there is also this term known as decarbonization that I kept mentioning before as well, that we need to decarbonize. We need to remove carbon from our atmosphere, the carbon that we are producing because of the anthropogenic activities. This is known as decarbonization. So how does it work? Our net zero pledge, how does it work? First of all, as I said earlier, that we will have to see a baseline, a base year needs to be set, and then you will have to see a proper reduction plan. And your reporting at the end of this entire process needs to be very transparent and clear for the media, for the public, for the community, and for the organizations that are interested in this for you. And then how can companies have short-term, medium-term, and long-term decarbonization goals? Because goals are not just like you stand up and say, I have this goal. No, your goal has to be very specific. It needs to be in smaller chunks. It needs to be in smaller parts that look real. Your goals need to be short, medium, and long-term. For example, looking at this chart, for example, there is a company that started in the year 2022. Okay, it said that this is the action plan that I have. Okay, so this is the kind of carbon dioxide emissions that are being produced in metric tons. It says that by 2030, this is the level of GHG reduction that I want to achieve. By the year 2050, this is the level that I want to achieve. These are the offsets that I want to have. This is the long-term plan that I have. Okay, so this is pretty clear that when it comes to scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, every single activity has been divided into different categories, into different long-term, short-term, and medium goals to move in a very authentic manner and to move in a process that looks real and credible so that it will be easier for you to achieve your goals. Okay, so just like I talked about different calculations, different formulas that you have to perform in order to record or calculate your greenhouse gas emissions, similarly, we have many softwares and websites online that can be used for calculating your levels. So for this, we have this website known as Mackay Carbon Calculator. Let's have a very brief look at how this works, okay? So when it comes to environmental communication, as the name refers, that environmental communication is about how we need to communicate our different goals and make the people and communities and all different entities related to, we need to make them aware of environmental goals. We need to help people change their behaviors when it comes to environment. We need to influence the public opinion. We need to have more people who are working for public policy advocacy. We need to address different kinds of conflicts when it comes to climate conflicts, and we also need to have better legislative and regulatory policies when it comes to environment. So there are certain standards and regulations of environmental communication known as CAP, ICC framework for responsible environmental marketing communications, Green Claims Code, or ISO 14063, which is from the ISO 14000 family. All of these four standards and regulations of environmental communication talk about how companies do not only need to record their greenhouse gas levels, they also need to be very transparent with their communications or environmental communications, and they also need to report their findings. Section 5 talks about this phenomena known as climate change resilience. There is this phenomena known as climate change resilience, under which two factors come: mitigation and adaptation. Now, what is the difference between climate change mitigation and adaptation? Let's watch a video for this.
What's the difference between adaptation and mitigation? Adaptation is trying to fix the effects of climate change, and mitigation is trying to fix the cause of climate change. But let's break down their differences and provide some examples. Let's start with adaptation. Adaptation means finding solutions to actual or anticipated effects of climate crisis and either prevent or minimize the damage it can cause. It's adapting, but it doesn't really tackle the source of the problem. Say you're on a ship with a leak. You'll want to take action before you sink. So maybe you grab a bucket and start bailing water out. But regardless of how efficient that might be, that's adaptation. Because you're not doing anything about the hole in the boat, which represents irreversible climate change, but you can do something about the water, which is the effect of climate change. In real life, adaptation can be building defenses against sea level rise or behavioral shifts like reducing your food waste, eating less meat, using less plastic, saving water, etc. It's basically a way to adjust our ways to live in a future severely impacted by the climate crisis. Now, what does mitigation mean? Well, unlike adaptation, mitigation tries to fix the problem at the source. The IPCC report defines mitigation as, quote, human intervention to reduce the sources or enhance the sinks of greenhouse gases. So let's hop back on the sinking ship. This time, instead of trying to deal with the water, you're going straight for the hole and sealing it up to stop the water altogether. In a real-life situation, this would mean reducing the sources of greenhouse gases, like the burning of fossil fuels, or retrofitting buildings and vehicles to be more energy efficient. But it also means enhancing carbon sinks to suck carbon out of the air with efforts like reforestation, preserving ocean power, soil enrichment, or even carbon capture technology. Basically, the goal of mitigation is to stabilize greenhouse gas levels enough to where ecosystems can naturally adapt to climate change, our food production is not threatened, and allow economic development to grow in a sustainable way. All that according to the IPCC report, of course. It's important to know that although these two responses are because of the same crisis, no single option is enough on its own. We've unfortunately reached a point where no one single path can save us. We see a lot of solutions trying to implement adaptation to a problem that can still be mitigated. And sometimes we see solutions trying to mitigate a problem that is way past the point of no return, and all we have left to do is adapt to the changes. So we need better solutions and policies that link both mitigation and adaptation. And we need all hands on deck to save the sinking ship, our planet. What's the difference between
Just like the video said, mitigation and adaptation are both part of the climate change resilience procedure in order to save the sinking ship of our planet, in order to protect our planet from the fate of something that is going to be very damaging. We need to have certain procedures. Mitigation means that we are doing something to fix the problem through clean energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable transportation. But on the other side, we need to learn how to live with climate change. We need to adapt ourselves to it. So we use certain kind of technology innovations, such as we using early warning systems, so that whenever there is a tsunami because of climate change, we will be warned earlier so that people can do something to protect themselves. When it comes to different kinds of climate resilient infrastructures, you have many new technological systems such as drip irrigation, desalination techniques, and many problems and many procedures that can be used to conserve and protect our wetlands and our ecosystems. But when it comes to technological innovations related to climate change adaptation, there are many risks that we have. For example, sometimes the plan that we make in order to warn ourselves of the tsunami might not be working in real life. The society might not be accepting our process. The technological failure is also something very probable. The political problem is one of the most biggest problems for us that might happen and might lead to hurdles for us. And then also geographical problems. One technological process for climate change adaptation that works for one area might not be working for another region. So just like every other region, we have European Union that has many financing climate change adaptation procedures, such as many coalition funds, such as CEF, EFCI, and EBC. You can go into details of these and talk about these. Geoengineering has one of the most important and most famous technique when it comes to technological innovations for climate change adaptation, in which we are using very modern technologies such as space reflectors, albedo enhancement, and many other procedures to enhance the amount of rains, to capture the kind of greenhouse gas emissions that are being produced, and then also to afforestation and reforestation in order to ensure that the sink availability is ensured to capture the greenhouse gas emissions. Biochar is another procedure, and then enhanced weathering is something that can protect our marine system. Okay, so there's one question that I have for the participants. What is the year in which we're expected to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by about 45%? So which year are we expected to have our greenhouse gas emissions reduced to about 45%? Would anybody like to answer? Okay, so the answer to this is that by the year 2023, we want to reduce our GHG emissions to 45% as compared to the level that we had in 2010. With this presentation on net zero, we come to the end of the content that we have. Now, I will tell you just a little about the assessment preparation. Now that you're done with getting the training, you are done with the tutorship, now you will have to learn how to prepare its assignment. So you will have to act like a consultant, and you will have to provide a report of 4,500 words, which can be divided into two parts, 2,500 words and 2,000 words. The learning outcomes 1, 4, and 5 will be answered under the report number 1 of 2,500 words. And then the second report, which are also a part of the main report, will be covering learning outcome 2 and 3. And you will have to use Harvard referencing. So with this, we come to the end of the presentation. If there's someone who has a question, they're welcome to come up and ask. All right, so thank you so much. With this, we come to the end of the time also. Thank you so much for attending the presentation, everybody. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.